Our final presentation this evening is from Valencia James, a Barbadian freelance performer, maker, and researcher interested in the intersection between dance, theater, technology, and activism. She believes in the power of the arts to inspire change. In 2013, Valencia co-founded the AI-AM project, which explores the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence in dance. The project has been presented at several international forums, such as the 2015 International Joint Conference on Artificial Intelligence in Buenos Aires, and premiered their first evening-length work in Budapest and Gothenburg in 2017. Valencia creates solo works which explore stereotypes and post-colonial narratives and has performed internationally. She co-founded the Volumetric Performance Toolbox, a collaborative project with Glowbox and Saurabh Louis, which envisions live online volumetric performance as a new way for artists to create and perform from their own living spaces and audiences to communally experience artworks using minimal equipment. Valencia James. Welcome, Valencia.
Hello, everyone. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, presume, okay. So thank you so much, Golan, for having me on this amazing residency. It's just such an honor and a privilege to be here with you all. And I just wanted to start this presentation by giving a bit of context about who I am and the lens that I bring to my work. So I am a Black femme from the island of Barbados. This is a very tiny island in the Caribbean. And it's not just like it might be tiny, but it has had a great significance in the way that we see the world working today, because this was a key place historically in the British Empire and the establishment of the sugar trade and the transatlantic slave trade, because Barbados was known as a sugar island, and this was like the first plantation-based society. And so this is where the first legislation was established that shapes the race relations in the US today, because it was first established in Barbados and then used in the United States in terms of how Black people were treated and laws like have a Black female slave, her children would be slaves as well automatically, and that's something that was unprecedented at that moment. And so it's this kind of sensibility that I come to my work, and also importantly, I am a movement and performing artist, and so my work with tech starts from my movement practice, and it comes from a place of curiosity about how emerging tech will impact the way I create and how it will impact the future of performing arts. And so in this slide, you see a still from the the theater production, I Am Here, that we premiered in 2017, which was a culmination of like about 5 years of research with some creative technologists from Sweden and Hungary. And we established the project AIM in 2013. And so our initial question was how could I teach a computer to dance? And so together with the creative technologists Alexander Berman, Gabor Pap, Gaspar Haidu, and Botan Bognar, we developed a tool, and I'll start that video. And so you can just see, we created this open source software-based tool that I used as a dance partner. And I was thinking of how can we use AI as a way to inspire new movements. And so, taking the limitations of our resources, we didn't have any access to a fancy motion capture lab. We created a tool that uses a very finite amount of dance data to create an exponential amount of novel movements. And this is like a low res version of the work that we didn't have money for really great renderings, but then we eventually got to a place that we could present the work and also speak to the issues of how machine learning was viewed in that time. There was a stick to me of like, either it's like a amazing savior or it's a slave or something that we have to be afraid of. But we thought of how AI could be seen as an equal creative partner. And I start with this because this was the starting point and the origin of the volumetric toolbox. Because as you can see in this clip, I'm constantly looking at this flat surface of avatar in a digital environment, and I got increasingly perplexed by this awkward divide of my physical space and the avatar's digital space. And then during the pandemic, let me see, I was, the theaters were closed and my performances were canceled. And, we were looking at how can we restage this piece? And I realized, well, what if I, as the performer, would go into the virtual space? And it was from this crazy idea that the volumetric performance toolbox was born. And so this is a collaborative project between myself, coming from an artist point of view, and also someone who makes her own tools, and the spatial interaction lab Glowbox, and Soor Bluey, who is a creative technologist. And we envision this toolbox as a way that artists can perform from their own living spaces using minimal equipment. And we were funded, it's all became possible via a fellowship by IBEAM called Rapid Response. And so we were lucky enough to have funding for 2 phases. And it's within the second phase that Golan reached out to me. And so this became like half of the time I was at OSSTA residency. We were working on this project. And so the toolbox, I'll talk a little bit, like very briefly about the toolbox. We are envisioning low-cost open hardware, open source software that would allow artists to create virtual performances in Mozilla Hubs, which is a social virtual reality platform. And throughout this process that was very much spearheaded by my artistic creation of a performance in Mozilla Hubs, we came up with an educational program that would allow any artist to create their own live volumetric performance. And so our vision is that this type of technology would be accessible to the artist, which would be like our primary, what we see as our primary audience, performing artists anywhere, and especially those who do not know how to code and who are usually not part of the creation and use of like technologies, as well as audiences that would be anyone who would like to have a communal art experience. And the idea is, how can we make this happen using minimal equipments and not needing like special equipment? So we found ways to have this all happen via web browser and using your desktop computer. And we're very much committed to the tenets of liberation, and with prioritizing communities that are usually harmed by technologies. So this project was very much spearheaded by just my curiosity with these technologies and the real need for performing artists to have a way to continue to practice their livelihood and perform in the time of the pandemic when theaters were closed down. And so in this slide, I'm just showing the start of that process. because those artistic findings and my own process was what shaped the technical development rather than the other way around. And so my collaborator from Globox, Thomas Wester, you see him in the photo on the left, shipped me a depth camera. We started using the Microsoft Azure Connect depth camera to start my research. And on the right, you see some my movement exploration that I recorded. So the depth sensing information is on the bottom and the normal RGB video is on the top. And my interest as a performer in volumetric video was that, first of all, I didn't need to use an avatar to represent myself in virtual space, because I could be represented as I am. And I think that was that's very powerful, being a Black femme, approaching like a virtual space that's usually dominated by white cisgendered male users and creators. And so this was a big part of why volumetric video was what we used. And so, and also that as a creator, I get agency to create my own stage. And that was really powerful in this time when, a lot of these online experiences and social media are like, already created for you, and then of course influence the way you exist and behave in these platforms. And so early on in my process, this was like in July when you had, the killing of George Floyd, and I was able to ground myself in my practice of connection with my ancestors. And I was very inspired by Stephanie Dinkins. She's a transmedia artist, and her quote on Afro-Nowism, and looking at what in my heart of hearts I want to create, even in this time of unrest and wanting to be reactionary, but how can I really speak to the issues that matter to me, but from a place of true creation and ancestral connection. And so I was also very inspired by Her Majesty Queen Mother Dorothy Desir's work. She's the Queen Mother of Benin, and also scholar and voodoo priest. And she speaks about the concept of spatial justice and as the right to the African descendants to the memory and commemoration of the injustices that they had been subjected to. And so, and also Octavia Butler's work, Kindred. And so all these influences brought me to the creation of our first volumetric performance. And you probably recognize maybe the structure from my earlier slide, because in my research, I also found SCI-Arc's spatial data of a sugar mill. It's a sugar mill ruin, and this was actually scanned in the Caribbean. And this is a very important kind of structure, because you see these ruins in all the islands around the Caribbean. And so with this work, I'm thinking of digital spaces and virtual environments as a possible site for healing and reclamation of spaces that were historically filled with pain and injustice. And so I'm gonna just show a short clip. So let's see. So what you just saw was one of our early performances, and some that you know we tested out um, the concept there. And one of the big questions we had was about liveness. And so in this photo and in the clip, you might have noticed some little avatars floating around. That's actually the audience members within Mozilla Hubs. And again, that's a social virtual reality space. You can access it through your web browser via URL, and you go in there and you're embodied by this avatar and you move around using the WASD keys, kind of like you'll be in a video game. It took a while for me to get used to moving in that space. But what we found was that we got beautiful feedback that you really had the sense of liveness. And this was a big question about how do you replicate that communal experience and that sense of liveness that we have when we experience a theater piece together. And so with this pilot performance, we were able to see that actually, yes, you do have that sense of liveness and the sense of witnessing and the sense of intimacy in that space. And so in this clip, you're seeing a still from the Q&A session where we could use our webcams, like how we do in with Vimeo, not Vimeo, sorry, Zoom, and we could have that kind of interaction even in this kind of virtual space. So from this, there's a big question of, okay, how do we make this, package this in a way that any artist can create their own performances in volumetric performances in online spaces and not need like a huge budget. And one of the things that came out of this first phase was the performance kit, which is a low-cost open hardware that was developed by Sorbluey and also Glowbox. And so this kit has a small Intel depth camera and a Raspberry Pi. And so the whole idea is that how do we make this, because normally these type of equipment, it needs a lot of a very expensive setup. And so this cost about $400. And so this is something that we were able to ship to artists to get them set up quickly. And the next element of the toolbox is the open source based customized software that Thomas Wester from Glowbox developed. And this is where we can tie the pipeline of the Mozilla Hubs platform together with the volumetric, the depth video that you get from the hardware, and create like a 3D representation of the artist in a virtual space. And so it's by tying these strings together, we were able to create the performance. This is showing how we place the volumetric stream. The stream also goes through like a live streaming platform called Mux. And in that way, this is how we create the performance. And what we did in the second phase of our fellowship at IBEAM was to bring this all together into a series of workshops and create like a residency within a residency. And so the goal of these workshops was how do we build a community of creators to have a platform of co-learning and co-creation. Because as the performing artist, I was still grappling with how do I even start creating in 3D. I don't have coding skills, and I was thinking about how can we make this easy for anyone just like me to pick it up and start creating. And so we hosted this kind of pilot residency in December and January. And we created this in collaboration with Simon Bowes of Glowbox, as well as the wider community of creators like Lauren Lee McCarthy and Lajnae McMillian and Tony Patrick. They all, as well as Salva Sweden and Jesse Escobedo and Marin Vaselli, and they all came together via Zoom. So this is a still from our first call. And we came together to speak about how can we create a future for online performances and envision a decolonized and decentralized future and vision for the performance. Because I really think of this way of creating as like the birth of a new genre that will continue to be relevant and groundbreaking beyond the pandemic. I really think that, you know, once we can get back into theaters, that new shows would also have like a virtual element to it. And so we were thinking about how can we create this in a way that is that makes sure we include communities from those marginalized communities that tend to be left out of the creation of these tools. And so we invited 7 multidisciplinary artists from these different communities, including disabled communities, the LGBTQ community, and Black and Indigenous and people of color. And we shipped each of these artists a kit and had these workshops of co-creation. And we also made these workshops open access via our Medium page. And I think I skipped it. Okay, so this was the result of that process. And this is like a vision of how we see the toolbox used, you know, going from now on into the future as a way in which artists can create their own worlds based on the core values that we have set about through this residency. It was really important that we set out the shared community values that are based on the tenets of liberation for all. And so we think of this as a way that we can empower artists of any kind to build their own worlds and really speak to real world issues from their actions in virtual space. And I really think that this is, you know, the huge potential of this work. And so I'm out of time, I realize. And so I'm just gonna skip to our next steps. Okay. Throughout this residency, I'm very grateful for this. Thank you again, Golan, and to my fellow cohorts and everyone at the studio. In this residency, we were able to make the next steps in onboarding more artists onto our custom Mozilla Hubs client, and so that they can continue using the platform for their own experiments and creating their own performances. And we're also learning, like personally learning a lot about open source projects and how you can sustainably create this, because I'm really invested in making this about a community of contributors and creators, and making sure that it's something that, you know, anyone can approach and create and contribute to. So thank you so much. And if you would like to join us on this journey, please don't hesitate to contact us at volumetricperformance@gmail.com. So I will stop my share.
Valencia, thank you so much. I was amazingly privileged to have the opportunity to attend the performance in Mozilla Hubs. And it was really extraordinary to see somebody performing live with a point cloud, you know, projected through into the browser and immersed in an artist designed three-dimensional virtual environment that I could freely navigate within. It was really, I haven't seen something like it before. And I hope we see more of these, both from you and from the collaborators you have. I thought something that we could do that would be fun is actually have like a 5 to 10 minute kind of conversation with AM and Bomani, who are still here with us, and invite them back. AM and Bomani, if you want to jump in. I can kick it off with a question, but I would love to actually just also hear the three of you, ask each other questions as well. Hi, Bomani, and welcome back, AM. If you can join us as well.
I will, but I'm finishing my last bite of lunch.
That's super. I'm gonna maybe spiel for just a second, because I mean it's been a huge privilege to work with you this past semester as our creatives and residents at the studio and as part of the OSSTA platform. I think that in developing open source software toolkits for the arts, and there's a sort of already a double struggle, the double financial struggle, right, of working in the cultural and arts sector, and then also working in the open source sector, because this, there's not like VC money that's kind of pouring in to fund this work. So there's a double struggle there. But you've taken on the triple struggle of not just making some tools that happen to be free and also help us make pretty pictures, but also that there's such an important aspect to what you're doing in terms of decolonizing technologies and creating feminist and anti-racist technologies as tools to empower others. I think it's a huge challenge, given histories of representation in animation and the arts, given histories of bias and violence in machine learning and artificial intelligence. So there's a third struggle there. And there are so many different strategies that I see in the work that you've been doing, increasing representation among the contributors, increasing representation among the users and audience, increasing representation in the artworks itself that are made with these systems, increasing access, being careful about textual languages of framing, design languages, codes of conduct. I wonder if maybe you could speak to, your favorites of these, what how hopeful you are for these kinds of things, and also if you have questions for each other that arise from your own presentations and your own experience over the past few months.
I don't have a question. I have just really a comment. I'm so inspired by both Bomani and Valencia's work, and I find it really heartening that all of us are really having an eye toward accessibility, right? Like cultural, technological accessibility, community accessibility, and like something that I feel like I wasn't available to me as I was moving through these like various systems, whether it's like visual art, technology, the intersection of both, like even academia, is, that awareness of a kind of culture accessibility, being thoughtful about the practices, being thoughtful about the community, thinking about the kind of like implicit hierarchies around like who's proficient or who has certain kinds of knowledge. And I really just, I see that deep community focus that's not just sort of it goes beyond just the language. It goes beyond just saying like, oh, well, we're going to create a space and here's a community, but like understanding, I forget what that amazing quote that Bomani had up, which was like, it's, oh, Bomani, you have to jump in and actually just say it, that it's like a continuous practice. It's not sort of like a momentary thing. And I'm both overwhelmed by that as someone who's now starting and caretaking an open source project, but also feeling that like that responsibility and that privilege to sort of like hold this space and try to nourish it. So yeah, that's my long-winded comment.
Yeah, I'm also like very inspired by you all, and AM, know that your work was cited like in those early workshops by some of the participants as one of the inspiring projects and people out there doing this type of work of community and decolonizing. And I'm very inspired. I'm very much inspired as well by the P5JS and ML5JS community, and understanding how from the code of conduct and the community statement, like that was early on in our process as well. That was a big inspiration. And so I'm still learning about, how we can build community and make sure that we're not working in silos, because that's something I had to unlearn. Um, and so, yeah, I'm just inspired to learn more about those practices. So, Bomani, if you could speak a bit about the ways in which we can learn to create more like collaboratively in that way. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I want to echo you all in saying I'm super inspired by the things that you all shared, and I'm always appreciative having the opportunity to just be in the Zoom, or in the space and be able to hear and kind of understand the way that you all come to your ideas. And I agree. I think that one of the things that I've also found personally has been super important in this whole durational practice of open source is just like finding ways to kind of stay energetic and revitalize ourselves. I think meetings like this are important, and I think having conversations and getting excited and generating ideas is important. But I'm also really excited by the way that both of you all in the presentations that you shared have like put in a lot of effort to create these like forms of community infrastructure through programs or workshops, or by hiring and supporting folks, sending out open calls. And I think that I'm actually really trying to understand how to do that better myself. And so I would love to know if either of you would be willing to kind of share just some of your insights for people who maybe are just getting started with that process of trying to, for lack of a better word, socialize or communalize, I don't even know if that's a real word, parts of their work in the open source kind of domain.
It's both Valencia and AM made residencies within residencies.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell y'all how I've been stumbling through it, right? Like, I think the first day of this residency, I was like, I don't know how to do a residency. I guess I'll learn. Maybe I'll be 1 week ahead of my own. I am someone that has historically been very siloed, has not had many collaborations. I love to collaborate, but I found that, as I was coming up, my ideas were not understood until they were complete. And then people were like, oh, that's so smart, or that's so brilliant, or I just couldn't imagine it before. And it's like, you couldn't imagine it because it was centered on like this body and this experience. And like, I always like kind of felt a little like resentful because I didn't have all of these skills. I wasn't a programmer. I didn't, I had to like very slowly start like picking up all of these skills, and because I didn't have the option to really work with, a wide spread of people. And so now, like, how I've been doing this for what, like 10 years, I guess now, it's like, oh, okay, I have a little bit of a platform. I have this opportunity. Now people are listening to the things I say, which is still very weird. And I think I'm having to go through this transition of like, oh, I can collaborate. Oh, I don't have to do everything myself. Oh, I can ask for help. I can have a vision, and it's okay to say like, can you help me with this? And not just can you like employ or deploy my vision, but can we like work on it together? Can we build and expand? And at least for me, this has been a part of my practice for a while, is just starting with a kind of radical vulnerability and transparency. It's actually, we didn't have enough time, but I actually started my talk with, I started to make slides, and I made one slide, and I was like, I hate making slides. Like, I literally hate it. I find it very confining and rigid, and it's not my style. And I went on this whole thing, like, why am I doing this? Why am I like constantly feel like I have to perform in a certain normative way? And it's like, by the way, if you could see my slides, all of my slides have literally this speech in them. And I was like, yeah, that's the way to do it. To be honest about the fact that like, I don't have a lot of models to tell people this is what I want to do. And like, I be transparent about the fact that I'm not totally sure where it's going. In my initial like call to the residency, I had like, these like 3 things that you had to agree to accept the fellowship. And I was like, the third one was like, to be patient with me as I figure out how to navigate this thing for the very first time. And it's really scary, but I found that kind of like literally going on Twitter and being like, this is what I want to do. I'm looking to craft loving depictions of Blackness. Like, where do I start? Yeah, I felt very embraced and welcome, and like I'm you know, where I used to feel like an island, I feel much more like an archipelago, you know, connecting with folks. So that's where I start, like with just the thing that we don't see, like, right, especially in like software and even certain art spaces, it's like everything has to be, even with a presentation, everything has to be fully formed and polished, as if not sullied by the grubby hands of the creator. And it's like, no, I'm grubby, I'm a mess, but I'm an excited mess. And like, if you want to get in this mess with me, like, let's do it. So that's how I'm doing it.
I love that, like owning like this is like a process and it's gonna be messy and we're figuring it out as we go, right? That sounds I must say that sometimes I can get quite overwhelmed because I was at like that, like at the beginning of the second phase when we were trying to figure out how to make this residency, you know, so I could relate to what to what you're talking about. It was kind of like what the best advice I got was just to, you know, keep, you know, having conversations with people who are interested in the work, and just, and it's through those conversations that, you know, I found, okay, maybe the way I was thinking about it before is limiting. So why not, you know, make this in community? And I realized like, oh, like, cause at first I was like, oh, how can we make this for like movement artists? And like, I was thinking like, okay, 5 movement artists, we do this. But I realized like, no, we need to have move people from movement and media, you know, so everyone can like support each other. And then we realized like, oh, it could also be a time of co-learning. So get people, you know, skill sharing from my community, just coming in and sharing, people from the 3D, making 3D models to, I don't know, world building. We had Tony Patrick give us a world building workshop, which is amazing. So I realized we have to do this in community.
Yeah, I love that. And I love, you know, AM in response to kind of where you were speaking about with the slides concept as well. I think that's something, that radical vulnerability is something that I've also been trying to learn slowly, but trying. And I think it actually came up in a conversation with a new contributor the other day, where someone was kind of like, hey, like I'm noticing these bugs, and like I'm noticing these issues in some of the documentation and so on and so forth. And I've recognized that that moment I had to just kind of be honest, like, yeah, like it's their issues. Like you're gonna get, y'all are gonna get some bugs, some documentation errors, y'all gonna get some broken examples. Like that's just where we are. And I think that being able to, like, instead of from personally, I think one of the things I need to remind myself of is that the way to address that is not always to just like rush and try to make the fix, and instead it's just to be okay with something not being, you know, finished or being polished, but rather just being okay with the fact that, like, you know, we're in just different stages of brokenness, or, you know, maintenance, or recovery, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that's something that I really want to reflect on as well from what you all are speaking to.
I think I'll wrap it there. I want to thank all 3 of you so much. For the audience online, you can follow AM's work, the Open Source Afro Hair Library, Valencia James, the Volumetric Performance Toolbox. Bomani has been working on the ML5JS toolkit for machine learning on the web. I want to thank all 3 of you so much for your wonderful contributions to this evening of presentations, and more generally to our Open Source Software Toolkits for the Arts residency at the Studio for Creative Inquiry.